right, so today we're doing Are You Covenanted? We're covering Are You Covenanted part 39. And I'm hoping that today we'll finish the Tanakh portion of this. We're going to start in Jeremiah chapter 23. Now remember, we're talking about covenant. We've discussed quite a bit up to this point about covenant from the point of view of what is a covenant. Then we talked a lot about the relationship between knowledge, wisdom, and understanding in keeping covenant. And then we started talking about covenant from the idea of redemption, about the future, about the reconciliation that comes through the idea of the promises of covenant. And we're still in that section here, and we're continuing in chapter 23 of Jeremiah, and we'll begin in verse 1. Woe to the shepherds, destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares Yahweh. So for those of you that sometimes sit in a seat and you feel like the message is booming and blasting and whacking at you, recognize that Yahweh doesn't leave the ones doing the speaking out of the equation. The shepherds, the teachers, those in the fivefold are given their due when it comes to messing up and getting corrected. And it starts off right here, woe to the shepherds. And you know that woe is about as strong as it gets when Yahweh's trying to say, you guys are messing up. Yeshua does this in Matthew 23, talking to the Pharisees and the scribes. He says, woe to you Pharisees, you scribes, you hypocrites. So we can connect up that maybe this woe has something to do with hypocrisy because Yeshua does that quite a bit. We also know that the Yahweh speaking here is Yeshua. If you don't understand what I just said, listen to Do You Know the Father and the Son? And so his use of the word woe, I think we could easily connect to some level of hypocrisy going on and not doing their job correctly. He says, because these shepherds are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture. Now, were they literally killing people? No. Were they literally scattering them and chasing them away? No. But what they were doing was, as leadership, is helping them to believe that they were in the right place doing things right when they weren't. Causing division, causing splits, and then because of their disobedience, causing Yahweh to fulfill his promise that he would scatter. So he's blaming the teachers and the shepherds and the leadership for causing and allowing the sheep to be scattered and destroyed. They're making choices in following their leadership to end up in destruction or being dispersed and scattered. Therefore, thus said Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, verse 2, against the shepherds who feed my people. You have scattered my flock, driven them away, and have not tended them. See, I am punishing you for the evil of your deeds, declares Yahweh. Now notice that Yahweh doesn't say something here. He doesn't say, why are you feeding my people? They should be fed directly by me. That doesn't change in the New Testament times when Yeshua shows up, that we're supposed to all of a sudden just be fed directly by him. There is always supposed to be shepherds that are feeding the flock. Go and do your study, you'll see it all the way through. As a matter of fact, what did Yeshua train 12 men to do? Well, maybe even 70 or 120 men to do. To go out and make disciples and to feed. What did he say to Kepha? Kepha, do you love me? And he says, what? Then go tend my sheep, feed my sheep. He didn't say, well, go tell them to tie in and lock into the Ruach. Why didn't he ever tell Peter to do that? Because it's through human vessels that he does these things. And the Ruach is a huge part of this, but not in the way you were always taught. Go listen to the teaching, understanding the Ruach. But let's continue here. He says, you have scattered my flock. This is to those who are feeding his people. A lot of you want to become teachers. A lot of you want to become shepherds or leaders of groups. You need to read all these strong admonitions to those who have those jobs to be careful that you don't fall into one of these categories. Because you can easily end up in big, big trouble. He says, you have scattered my flock, driven them away. Not driven them away physically necessarily out of where they were living, but driven away from being in covenant with Yahweh. Covenant is that they should obey everything Yahweh said. And in this case, they were starting to obey these shepherds and not Yahweh when they were telling them, hey, no, it's okay if you do this, and it's okay if you do that. And you see that Jeremiah runs into this quite a bit. he's walking around and he sees them selling idols in the marketplace, and they're doing all kinds of things with the food and all kinds of other things that they're doing that's breaking Torah. He says, you're driven away and have not tended them. So what does tending the sheep look like? What does a shepherd do when they tend the sheep? They have an awareness of what's going on with the sheep. They're observing the behavior of the sheep. They're noticing if any of them are going off in a wrong direction to help bring them back into the fold of the sheep. They're making sure that they're healthy and fed. So you're not tending the sheep. He says, I am punishing you for the evil of your deeds. So again, the word evil is being used here, like we've seen in many places, where things are not being used or people are not doing what they were designed and called to do. It is called evil. Shepherds are to tend the flock, and these were not, and so what they were doing was called evil. He says, therefore, because of all these things you are doing, I shall gather the remnant of my flock out of all the lands which I have driven them, and shall bring them back to their fold, and they shall bear and increase. So he's saying, look, I've scattered many. You guys are dropping the ball. I'm going to bring them back and let them pick up the ball. You should be ashamed of yourselves for dropping it, is what he's saying here. He says, and I shall raise up shepherds over them. Oh, so he's not bringing them back so that they can just tie directly into the Ruach, into the Spirit, or they could just directly, get some direct downloads. He said, I'm going to raise up shepherds over them, and they shall feed them. So there's going to be a new flock of shepherds, a new group of shepherds trained and raised to feed them. And they shall fear no more, nor be discouraged, nor shall there be lacking, declares Yahweh. Now, the they that he's talking about here is who? The flock or the shepherds? I'm going to say both. Let's look at it for both categories. He says, and they shall fear no more, nor be discouraged, nor shall they be lacking. I think the shepherds in verse 2, okay, where he's giving them the scathing, you have done evil. Those shepherds often did what they did because they were afraid, maybe afraid of secular influences, afraid of the king, afraid of the people. And so out of fear, they caved, they gave in, they compromised, or they got discouraged because things didn't work out the way they had hoped immediately. Judas essentially did what he did because he was discouraged. Yeshua was not going to be the Messiah he wanted him to be at that moment. And so he did what he did because he was discouraged. He says, nor shall they be lacking. Now, of course, the shepherds weren't lacking, but they could perceive that they were lacking. Many a prophet has said, why do the rich and the wealthy and they seem to prosper? All these people that they're doing wrong, the evildoers, the wrongdoers, they seem to prosper. And we don't. We suffer and we lack. See, it's a perception problem. Many of you, if you had everything you ever wanted or desired, would be of completely no use to Yahweh. Maybe most of us, if we were spoiled with the abundance. Israel often was spoiled with abundance, and it just turned them into that complacent, slacking off type of mindset where they didn't do what Yahweh said to do. That's what we have in Deuteronomy, where it says, when you've eaten and you are satisfied and you've built great houses and have all this wealth, don't forget who gave you the power to have the wealth, to create the abundance. Well, why would he say that? Well, because it's likely and possible that you might switch your mindset because of the spoiledness of having the abundance, for being spoiled. So they may have been acting from fear or being discouraged or lacking. Also, he's encouraging those that were scattered, because in being scattered, they were no longer receiving the blessings of being the cohesive nation in the land. And they were, I'm sure, in the scattered dispersion operating out of fear, as many of us do in the dispersion. And they were operating out of being discouraged. Anybody been in fear or discouragement in the scattered? All of you in dispersion. Anybody feel a lack of stuff? And he's saying, I will call you back. I'm going to bring you back, and you will not be suffering from fear or discouragement or lack anything. This is a great encouragement for all of us, because he's going to raise up shepherds over us, and they're going to feed us, and they're going to bring back all of these things as we're brought back into the fold. And there should be no more fear or discouragement or lack. Now, while we're in the dispersion, we can certainly, I was going to say have two of the three, but really we could have all three. You should not have any fear. We're told that we're given the spirit of a sound mind, not of fear. So you should not be operating in fear. Of course, the entire book really is the expression of the battle throughout time between fear and doubt and trust and belief. I mean, that's really the entire scriptures is about that. And he's telling us to have no fear. You know, if you're not understanding the idea of fear and how that really plays through, listen to the fear of Yahweh teaching. You know, Deuteronomy 10:12 tells us that what Israel is being expected to do. You know, it starts off with, and now Israel, what does Yahweh expect of you? Step one is to fear him. So we fear him so that we're not afraid of anyone or anything else. So if you're still afraid of anyone or anything else, you have not quite fully grasped the fear of Yahweh. Therefore, you might want to go back and listen to the teaching on the fear of Yahweh so you can understand where the problem is, where you have a disconnect in that area. Because I can tell you, as someone who counsels a lot of people in the body, the number one problem that almost everyone has is that they're making decisions and responding to situations out of fear. There's fear that's driving their responses to life. Insecurities are based on fear. The panic that people have, the offense that they take, because even offense is taken often because you're afraid someone may look at you a certain way or see you a certain way or believe a certain thing of you, so you get offended. Again, that's out of fear. A totally selfless person can't get offended, but they're also completely not fear-based. They have no fear. I don't have any fear how, if I'm selfless, I don't care how you look at me. I'm not afraid of what you may think of me. Because what you think of me doesn't actually have any effect on me. Because I'm selfless. I'm not saying I have reached that. I'm saying if I'm a selfless person, I'm just speaking as if I was. I still have all too much self, just like all of us do, and we're working on it, right? But recognize that that's where the fear operates. And so when we have the fear, the insecurities, the wrong mindset, what happens next? We often get discouraged. We get discouraged. And I talk to a lot of you that get discouraged. And I'm not picking on you at all. It's a common problem in the body. We are often finding ourselves in this place where we are discouraged. We are not going forward like we'd like to. We're not seeing results like we'd like to. Or we start seeing ourselves more clearly in the mirror, and then we think, how am I ever going to make it? Look how messed up I am. You look at yourself and say, why would he ever love me and forgive me? Look at all the things I've done. Instead of accepting that he has called you because he does love you and he sees something you're not seeing in that mirror. He's not seeing, like Christianity taught you, Yeshua standing in your place. Oh no, he sees you exactly like you are, but in addition, he sees you knowing what you can be, knowing where you can go, the change you can go through, the transformation. Okay, let's not look at this from a mainstream sort of point of view, like, well, he doesn't see me, he sees Yeshua. Well, not yet. He may see some of Yeshua as you've been transforming for a while, but he sees the end from the beginning. He knows what the finished work will look like, and he knows where you've been and what you've been through. But yet we get discouraged. You know what? If you have not good shepherds, the shepherds that are not doing a good job are not going to encourage you. The ones who are not doing a good job are not going to help you to understand that you can do it. You know, that's why one of the reasons why the other day, I think it was on a Rosh Chodesh when we did the service, I kept telling you, you can do it. Not because I think so, even though I do, but the reason I do is because he thinks so. Remember, you didn't get here because you're smart and figured something out. You got here because he opened your eyes. In other words, he made a choice, a timing, and selection to go choose you at that moment and reveal himself to you enough to get you to search, to ask, to knock, and seek. And so why would he do that? Did he make a mistake? Because if you get all discouraged and panic and think you can't do it, you're essentially saying he made a mistake. Anybody really think he makes mistakes? Okay, so if he doesn't make mistakes, then he called you knowing. Anybody have any doubt that he knows just how yucky and messed up you were before he called you? Any doubt that he knows everything you've ever done? Well, if he knows all of that and called you at that moment, where you were at that moment anyway, why are we afraid and why are we discouraged? We should be very encouraged and filled with overflowing joy and belief that even though I can't see it, he sees it, I know I can do it. Doesn't matter that I can't see it. If you have children, you probably have had moments where you did this with your child, where they were struggling at something and they just couldn't see that they could ever get it. And you know they can, because you know why? Because you've had life experiences where you struggled and eventually you got the skill set to do whatever it was with practice and effort. And you tell your child, it's okay, keep trying, you can do it. They can't see it though. No, I can't. And they're throwing the things around and they're just throwing their hands up in the air and they're stomping their feet and they can't do it. Wait a minute, no, that was me trying to get my passwords to work the other day. Okay, sorry. Any of you who know me know how much fun I have when I try to log into anything that the computer no longer has the password because it's cleared the cache or whatever. Not fun. Okay, I got a lot of growing to do there. But you got to be encouraged. Let's live in reality, okay? We have too much delusion still in our lives. Let's live in reality. We know that there is a creator. We know from the Father and the Son teaching, from what he says in his word, that the Father reveals the Son reveals the Father, to whom they choose, when they choose, how they choose. That is scriptural. That's not my opinion. That's not me just making something up. We show it verse by verse. Yeshua says it very clearly. Now, if that's true, if that's reality, then the fact that your eyes are open, and you know they are, because you see things your friends can't see, your family can't see, your children can't see, your parents can't see, whatever it is. You understand things they can't understand. You receive information in a different way when you read the word than they do, because he's done a work in you to reveal something. That is reality. Now, the other part of that reality is he did this knowing that you would take that opportunity and you have the ability to go forward through the transformation to become Yeshua-like and enter the kingdom. That is the reality. Okay, he wants to covenant with you, not because you can't do it, but because you can do it. You need to embrace that fully. Because the covenant, look, he says that, we read this, I think last part, when Jeremiah 31, it says he's going to make a new one, not like the old one which they broke. Okay, so he already dealt with the people that broke covenant. Why would he choose you unless he was confident you would keep covenant? Think about it. He already dealt with the people that broke covenant, and not all of them did. The majority, though, the remnant didn't. There was always a remnant that kept. And so why did he call you? By the way, is he calling you into a huge body, or is he calling you to be a part of a remnant? He's calling you to be part of a remnant. So he knows this is not going to be a humongous group. There's not like a majority of the planet at this point yet. It's going to be a small group. But he's called you because you can. No fear, no doubt, no discouragement. And quite frankly, can we admit the last part of this, that we're really not lacking anything? You're really not lacking anything. All of you still have food and shelter and clothing and basic needs. Now, you may struggle to have them, but you have them. And somehow it always works out, doesn't it? Maybe just barely sometimes, by the skin of your teeth, as they say, but, you're just a little bit above that drowning mark, but you always have, and you never lack the things you need. It works out. But do we believe that and trust that? He says, I'm going to raise up shepherds over them, and they shall feed them. And they're also going to, I believe, it doesn't say this here specifically, they're going to encourage them to not be afraid, to not be discouraged, to understand that they don't lack any good thing. All right, this is the first edition for this teaching. We'll go to, I wasn't going to, but I think I need to anyway. Let's look at in Matthew 6, okay? I just felt the Ruach prompting me. We had to go here anyway. So in Matthew 6, it says here in verse 25, because of this I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, or about your body, or what you shall put on. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? By the way, this isn't talking about whether or not something is food. It's about whether or not you have any. He's talking about don't worry about the needs to sustain life. He says, look at the birds of the heaven, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into storehouses, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth more than they? Now, by the way, he wouldn't be saying this in verse 25 about, do not worry, unless there was a problem where they were worrying. See, we have to remember context is, well, who's talking? Why is he talking? What's the issue? What's going on? Well, Yeshua is speaking here to a crowd of people, and he's saying, look, you guys have a problem with worry, with fear, with doubt. And they also have a problem understanding in their perspective that just like the Creator takes care of the birds and the fish and the animals, why would you think he wouldn't take care of you? Do you see a lot of stressed out birds or stressed out animals just running around doing their thing, panicking because they didn't find whatever they were looking for? Not really. Okay? He says, look at the birds of the heaven, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into storehouses, yet your heavenly Father does feed them. Are you not worth more than they? See, part of it is the self-worth thing. We have a real challenge with self-worth. Some of us were beaten into, I guess the mainstream does this a little bit, saying that it's not you, it's him, everything is him, so we don't look at self at all. No self-esteem, no self-worth. We're not telling you to esteem self, we're telling you to have self-esteem. Totally different. We're not asking you to elevate yourself and hold yourself out there as being, look at me, how awesome I am. But self-esteem, recognizing that I have value, I have worth because he made me and he called me. And so having that understanding of intrinsic value and worth because of who you are and what you are in him, and that he made you and put you here to do these things that you're doing. As opposed to esteeming self, which is where you want everybody to look at you and elevate you and raise you up. That's where the pride and ego comes in. Sounds similar, self-esteem and esteeming self, but it's not the same thing. So look at it as value, and understanding the value you have in you, in his eyes, the value you have in you in others' eyes. There are people that value you. If you weren't here, you would absolutely be missed by some. Maybe not by all, but by some. And to those some, you are greatly valued. You have high value. You are esteemed in their eyes. They honor and esteem the value you have in their lives. He says, but don't do these things. Are you not worth more than they? And the answer to that is, of course you are. Verse 27, and which of you by worrying is able to do anything of use, really? Is able to add 1 cubit to his lifespan? In other words, what do you really get from worry? Angelia mentioned that during the prayer time. I spoke to her last week and I encouraged her. I said, what happens is going to happen. Don't worry about it. Worrying doesn't change the outcome. And by the way, there are statistical studies that have shown that the vast majority of the things you worry about never happen anyway. So you exhausted yourself with all this emotional drain for no reason. I forget the statistics, but I've seen them one time. It's something like 85 to 90% of things you worry about don't happen. Another 10% that do, like another 8% of that, even if it does happen, turns out to not be a big deal. It's only like 1 or 2% of the things you worry about actually end up being a big deal. And guess what? There's nothing you could have done about it anyway, most of the time. So why do we worry? Awareness of a situation should help you to take action. Okay, so you're aware of something that has concern. Concern is different than worry. Because with a concern, you may do something to mitigate the problem. Okay, I see my child playing and they're getting closer to a fence that's near an edge of something, and I'm concerned they may be dangerous for them. So I just, without worry, I walk over and I just go and I bring them away from the fence or the edge where they might be in trouble. As opposed to screaming, get away from that edge, Okay? They probably weren't going to fall off the edge even if you did nothing. But you are observant, you see something, you have a concern, and so you take an appropriate action calmly. But when we worry and panic, we jump to a conclusion that somehow this awful thing, in your mind, it's almost already happened. You're reacting like it's happened already, which is very painful emotionally. And so this costs us a lot. It also can cost us in our relationships, because if we react in that panic and we do it in response to a person, that could adversely affect our relationship with that person because we are overreacting. It happens a lot. So be careful when he says, look, this is reality again. We're living in reality. He says, which of you by worrying accomplished anything, is what he's saying. What did worrying actually accomplish? Nothing. Now remember, I'm not saying concern is not necessary. Concern is an observance that something potentially adverse could happen. Maybe you should take an action. That's different than worrying. We worry about things generally that we can't control. We have concerns about things that we can't control. If it's a concern, we say, okay, let me do what I can, and then I have peace about the rest of it. Okay, so if you know you've done everything you can with your job, maybe you have a job situation that seems to be potentially in jeopardy. Well, that's a concern. You might lose your job. So what can you do? You can do what you can at the job to hopefully secure it the best you can, and you could be looking for another one in case you lose it. And then have peace. No worry. Because some of you right now who've counseled with me are in different jobs than when you first counseled with me, and you were all worried and panicking, what if I lose my job? And some of you are in much better jobs now than you were before. Not because of me, but because I helped you to calmly go through the process. And then Abba blessed you for going through the process calmly. No panicking. You had concern. With concern, you take all necessary actions, and then you have peace. Let me say that again. Instead of worrying, when you notice something that causes concern, you take all necessary action and then have shalom, peace. That's our process. Do what you can, have peace that you've done what you can, and then allow it to then process. Allow it to just be what it is. Be at peace. But you also got to ask yourself, have I done everything I can do? In other words, have I gotten counsel? Have I sought appropriate help? Counsel doesn't mean necessarily calling me. It means talking to somebody maybe that you know has an expertise in that particular, maybe your boss at work, maybe a supervisor, and maybe a relational thing in the family. You might want to talk to a family member. Whatever it is, have I done everything I can do? And if the answer is yes, and you've done it the best you can, be at peace. Have shalom. He says here, so why do you worry about clothing? Know well the lilies of the field, how they grow, they neither toil nor spin. And I say to you that even Shlomo in all his esteem was not dressed like one of these. But if Elohim so clothes the grass of the field, which exists today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, how much more you, O you of little belief? So then he cuts right into you and says, when you do this, I want you to hear Yeshua's voice, whatever that sounds like in your head, saying to you every time you panic and worry, just picture him shaking his head like this and just looking down a little bit going, oh, you of little belief. I don't think any of us wants to hear that. We want to hear, well done, good and trustworthy servant. We don't want to hear, oh, you of little belief. And by the way, he's not doing that because you struggled with a piece of law. He's saying it because you worried and you panicked. Struggling with a piece of the Torah is where we get on our knees and we repent and we make teshuvah and we fix it. This is the worry panic part. This is the emotional part. He says, why do you do these things? Because when you do them, you're demonstrating you have a very small amount of belief. Your belief is struggling. Do not worry then, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? Somebody must have been at my house at breakfast. People not knowing what to eat or drink or what to wear for, that's a different joke, never mind. They don't struggle like that at your house, arguing about, oh, I don't know what to eat for breakfast or this, and then what am I going to wear today? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people thinking they don't have any food or anything to drink or any clothing. Okay? Just let's be clear about this. No, do not worry then, saying, where am I going to get food from? Where am I going to get something to drink from? What am I going to wear? How am I going to clothe myself? It's like your Heavenly Father is aware of these things. He'll provide them. He says, in case that wasn't hard enough telling you your little belief in verse 30, verse 32 he goes, for all these the Gentiles seek for. Okay, you're supposed to come out of her, my people, come out from among the nations, not imitate the nations. Hey, but you're doing just what they do. They're all focused on all those things. He says, not you, don't do that. He says, your Heavenly Father knows that you need all of these things. But seek first the reign of Elohim, the kingdom of Elohim, and his righteousness, and all these shall be added to you. So we seek first, making sure we're vertically aligned correctly. His righteousness. But of course, I've spoken to some people recently that have not gone through the teachings that I've done, new people, and they don't understand what it means when he says things like his righteousness. See, Christianity would tell you his righteousness would be seeking the righteousness of Messiah and having that applied to you. No, it's saying here, seek first the kingdom of Elohim and the way things are done in the kingdom. What he has decided is right. Seek doing things right according to the kingdom's way of doing things that are right. Because righteousness is simply a label for those doing what is right. According to what? According to him. See, if you're doing things right according to the world, you might get an attaboy or a good job or some sort of thing like that. But when you do things that are right according to your Creator, it's called righteous. You are called righteous when you do what he says is right. He says, and then all these other things will be added to you. Don't worry about them. Do not then worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow shall have its own worries. By the way, did anybody notice that after you finished worrying about something, something else came up for you to worry about? Never a problem with that happening, right? He says, don't worry about today. Today's got its own worries. Tomorrow's got its own worries. There's never going to be an end of things you could worry about if you wanted to. He says, each day has enough evil of itself. If you're so busy still worrying about things from last month and last week, where's your capacity to handle what's happening today? That's why so many of you are in, I would call it, you're living a life of overwhelm. You're existing in an overwhelmed existence. Your capacity has already been overflowed. See, when your capacity can still handle more, we do okay. But if you don't release some of the things that you're holding on to, that you're stressing about, you're worried about. Stress basically is what? It's another label for that which we worry and concerned and upset about and all those other things. It's called stress. If you ever use the phrase, I'm stressed, I feel stressed, I'm overly stressed, well, then you're having a problem with this stuff. You want a stress release? Release all this stuff. My job has me stressed. Why? Do your job and go home. But, stop but. Get a different job if it's stressing you so much, but stop being stressed. Why do we complicate things so much? People see how busy I am and they think, well, that I'm under all kinds of stress. Not really. I don't stress about stuff. If you know me, you know I'm telling the truth. Now, I may have a moment where there's an urgency that I'm handling something, but that urgency gets handled and I never think about it again. But that's an in-the-moment crisis or something. Stress is an accumulation of unresolved things that you're not willing to let go. Okay? We're not talking about the urgencies and the crises that do come up in your life, which when they come up, generally we handle those pretty good. We do what has to get done, and then the crisis passes, and we move on to the next one. But it's the unresolved things that we're fearing and doubting and having a lack of belief in how Abba's going to resolve it for us or how we're going to be led through a path of how we can fix it, those things create the stress. In covenant, let's tie this thing all the way back around. There shouldn't be any stress. That's what Yeshua is saying here in chapter 6. When you're in covenant, there is no reason to stress. In the reality of the covenant that you're in, those things should be confidently understood to be provided when you need them. So why are you stressed? Well, I'm stressed about my budget. Well, why? Well, because there's more month at the end of the money. Okay, so fix it. Why are you stressed about it? Do what you need to do to fix it. Sell something, unburden yourself of things you don't need, and get a better job or get a second job. I mean, there's ways to fix it. Stop being stressed about it. I'm stressed about my children. I'm stressed about my parents. I'm stressed about my husband. I'm stressed about my wife. Because you haven't done anything to fix these things. Resolve to fix them, you won't be stressed. Am I making any sense? Oh, but that's going to take a lot of work. Oh, yes, it will. But not doing the work is not going to relieve the stress. And they're finding scientifically more and more just how much stress is costing you in your health. And by the way, it says here, by worrying, which of you by worrying is able to add 1 cubit to his life? No, how about the other way around? By worrying, you're taking away time from your life. You are shortening your life. It'd be great if they could actually measure that. Then maybe people would stop worrying so much. Let's just call it 1 for 1. For every hour you worry, you're losing an hour of life somewhere at the end. Probably not that far off. Okay? And think of it as compounding. Maybe worrying just for an hour, maybe it costs you a minute of your life, but if you do it 2 hours in a row and 3 hours in a row, that second hour costs you more. And if it's days, it costs you more. And it's weeks and months, it costs you more. The unresolved stress, because you have not done what you need to do to release and relieve that. You know, we're supposed to rest in Messiah, come and rest. But that's not just this ethereal Christian idea of, oh, I'm just going to go rest, and I don't know what that is. I mean, what it looks like. You close your eyes and just whatever. No, we rest in understanding that what he said is true. And because it's true, we can let go of stuff. That's how you have rest in Messiah. Trusting what he said. Trusting what he does. Trusting what he says he will do. Trust and belief versus fear and doubt. You cannot covenant successfully in fear and doubt. You know, in Jeremiah 31, it talked about my covenant which they broke. Why did they break the covenant? Because the fear and doubt was stronger than the trust and belief. If they trusted, they would have done what they needed to be in that place called trust and belief. But they started deciding that they know better, and I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to trust what you say. I'm going to do it a different way. And it did not work. So even that fear and doubt is self-sovereign driven. Because some of you say, well, that's not really fear and doubt. Sometimes it's just self-sovereign. Well, there's another piece of it too that has to do with it, which is that me, I. But that's driven by the fear that it's not going to be what you want, so you jump in and do it. So still fear-based. Can we see that? The ego and the pride of the me, I jumps in and does what it wants to do because it is afraid that it will not like what's going to happen. It will not like or prefer what the results are going to be of doing it the way Yahweh said. So it's still a fear-driven self-sovereignty. You jump on that seat, the throne in your own life, because you're afraid that it won't be what you want. By the way, that's why people in marriages usurp. Wives will do that to husbands. That's why people at work usurp, and they'll do it to employers because they're afraid that the employer is going to do something wrong or is going to adversely affect something. You have to be careful that we don't, out of fear and panic, jump into places that we don't need to jump into. There's right processes for all of those things. Do the right process. There's congregational appropriate processes. Do the right process. But it's out of fear. Well, if I don't do something, it's going to go wrong. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe it's supposed to go wrong. Maybe Abba's allowing it for a reason. Just like when the kingdom split, Yahweh said, don't try to fix this. The split is of me. Yes, it looks awful that it split. And yes, it's not what everybody wanted at that moment. but yes, it's going to serve my purpose. That's hard sometimes to recognize that things are going to go south in your life and go wrong, and somehow that still serves his purpose. Or there are things that you feel like, but I can jump in, but just allow it to be. Be careful that you don't just jump in where you don't belong. It's very, very important that you learn these lessons. All right, let's go back to Jeremiah 23. See, I knew we weren't going to get done today. Okay. All right, Jeremiah 23, and in verse, where were we? 4. Okay, so verse 5. See, well, let's go back to verse 4. And I shall raise up shepherds over them, and they shall feed them. So these are going to be good shepherds. And they shall fear no more, nor be discouraged, nor shall they be lacking. So the good shepherds are going to help the people to see and receive a life without fear, nor be discouraged, nor will they lack. Not just because the shepherds will provide everything, but because the shepherds will help them realize they have everything already. That is right there. See, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall raise for David a branch of righteousness, and a sovereign shall reign and act wisely and shall do right ruling and righteousness in the earth. So now we're back to that idea of the branch. We talked about that last time in part 38. The branch, this is referring to Yeshua, the branch. He says, I'm going to raise a branch of right ruling, of righteousness, of doing what is right. And a sovereign shall reign and act wisely. Now this is, we'll see the connection here to the end times, in case we're thinking that might be talking about in some way, which it could, to like a Hezekiah or something, but we are looking forward. It says here, and the sovereign shall reign and act wisely and shall do right ruling and righteousness in the earth. In his days, Yehudah shall be saved and Israel shall dwell safely. And this is his name whereby he shall be called Yahweh our righteousness. Wow. Okay, so here we have, in that time, this is basically like Jeremiah 31:31, where there's going to be a new covenant between the house of Israel and the house of Judah with Yahweh, and then they shall become one again, just called the house of Israel. That hasn't happened yet. And they shall be saved and delivered. Oh, in those days, Judah will be saved. Now, by the way, I was talking to someone the other day about salvation, and if you haven't listened to the Are You Saved series, you need to. And I said there's not a single verse that says that you are saved. They said, no, there is. And he quoted me 3 verses, and all of them quoted the words, shall be. I said, did you notice the key phrase in every one of those verses you read? He goes, no. I said, the word shall be. He who endures to the end shall be. Okay? So salvation's a process. Okay? Now, he's saying here in that process, at some point, Yehudah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely, and this will be his name whereby he shall be known or known. Now, by the way, called doesn't mean it's literally going to be his name, Yahweh our righteousness. He's going to be known as Yahweh our righteousness. Now, if you don't understand that, go listen to the Father and Son teaching. Yeshua should be understood and known as Yahweh our righteousness. Just like he would be understood as Emmanuel, God is with us. Not that his name was going to actually be called Emmanuel, but that he would be known as God with us. Therefore, see, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when they shall no more say, as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, but as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel out of the land of the north, and from all the lands where I had driven them, and they shall dwell on their soil, their own soil. So is this something that has happened yet? There are those that will say yes, because of the 1948 building of Israel and people coming from all over the place. But that's connected to the verse that says, and they shall dwell safely. Has Israel dwelt safely at all since 1948? Not even for like a second. And so, no. So people cannot they will take these things, they'll twist them and tell you, oh no, that's already been fulfilled. Really? Do you not read context? All of this is together in one context. These things will all be happening together. The branch will come. So we're not talking about Yeshua coming at this point yet, because when that branch comes, he's going to act wisely and rule. And in those days, Yehudah is going to be saved. Israel is going to be dwelling in safety. They're not going to even talk about the exodus out of Egypt anymore. Now they're going to talk about the exodus out of all the lands. It's very important that we understand this. He says, my heart within, oh no, we're going to stop in verse 8. This is going to be such a huge thing. So this is part of that redemptive part of covenant. In the covenant, he says, if you obey my voice, I'm going to do these other things. I'm going to take care of all your needs. But in that covenant, it also says, and if you don't, these things are going to happen, and then ultimately you're going to be dispersed and punished for it, and then at some point I will gather you back when you've learned what you needed to learn in the dispersion. And so that's all part of the covenant promises. Within the covenant promises, it already has like a prenup, so to speak. It says, if you do this, this is going to happen. If you do that, this is going to happen. But then it always comes back to the path back. He built into it the way back, as he's waiting for us to do our part in journeying back. Let's go to Ezekiel 37. Yowzer. Okay. How am I going to finish this quickly enough? Doesn't matter. We'll do what we get done. Ezekiel 37. See, no stress. Yahweh just decided we had to go to Matthew 6, and so that's what we did. All right, so apparently that's what we needed to be. So starting in chapter 37, in verse 1. The hand of Yahweh was upon me and took me out by the Spirit of Yahweh and set me down in the midst of a valley, and it was filled with bones. So this is a vision, okay? And he made me pass among them all around, and see, there were many, very many on the surface of the valley, and see, they were very dry. In other words, they'd been there a while. And he said to me, Son of man, would these bones live? And I said, Oh, Master Yahweh, you know. Again, he said to me, prophesy to these bones, and you shall say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahweh. Okay, hold on. I don't think I've ever used this before, but I think it's a great verse to use to prove my definition of prophecy. He says, prophesy to the bones. Now, is he telling him to speak the future, or is he telling him speak the word of Yahweh with authority? Watch what he does. He says, prophesy to the bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahweh. So speaking the word of Yahweh with authority is prophesying. Thus said the Master Yahweh to these bones, see, I am bringing into you a spirit, and you shall live. And I shall put sinews on you, and bring flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put a spirit in you, and you shall live. And you shall know that I am Yahweh. And I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and there was a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And I looked and saw sinews, and flesh came upon them, and skin covered them, but there was no spirit in them. And he then said to me, prophesy to the spirit, prophesy, Son of man, and you shall say to the spirit, thus said the Master Yahweh, come from the four winds, O spirit, and breathe on these slain, so that they live. So he's talking about the Ruach here. Now the Ruach, as we taught in the Ruach teaching, is often used, even as the word is used to describe the wind, and how the Ruach hovered over the surface of the earth. And so he's saying to prophesy that the Spirit, which is the means by which Yahweh interacts with man and infills us and indwells us, says to him, come from the four winds, O Spirit, and breathe on these slain so that they live. And I prophesied as he commanded me, and the Spirit came into them, and they lived, and stood upon their feet, a very great army. Now, when we go to the beginning in Genesis, we see Adam created, and what happens with Adam? He has the breath of life breathed into him. How many men, human beings, existed at that time? One. This is a huge valley of bones. So it takes this huge wind of the breath of life coming to fill all of them at the same time. Can we see how that works? That's why it says, call on the Ruach to come, and it's like a wind breathing on the whole valley at the same time. No different than what happened with Adam, where the breath of life was. So in other words, the bones all came together, they had skin on them, but they had no life in them. The life had to be breathed into them, and it came in the form of a wind. Well, that's what it, metaphor was, that he felt like coming from the four winds, the Spirit breathed on all of them. And it says, let's see, and I prophesied as he commanded, and the Spirit came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, a very great army. And he said to me, Son of man, these bones are all the house of Israel. See, they say, our bones are dry, our expectancy has perished, and we ourselves have been cut off. So now he's helping to understand that this is not necessarily a literal thing about people dying and then skin coming on them and being resurrected. This is a metaphor that Ezekiel is being told about the house of Israel that has been scattered, that is being punished, that has lost connection. And here's what they're talking about. They're saying, our expectancy has perished. In other words, we've lost our hope. The expectancy that we would be his people. The expectancy that's in the covenant. Because the covenant is based on an expectancy. He expects certain things of us. We expect certain things of him. And that's agreed to in what's called a covenant. He says, you can expect this stuff of me, but I expect these things of you. It says, our expectancy has perished, and we ourselves have been cut off. In other words, what's the point of life anyway? Might as well be dead, dry bones. Therefore prophesy and say, you shall say to them, thus said the Master Yahweh, see, O my people, I am opening your graves and shall bring you up from your graves and shall bring you into the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am Yahweh when I open your graves, O my people, and bring you up from your graves. And I shall put my spirit in you, and you shall live, and I shall settle you in your own land, and you shall know that I, Yahweh, have spoken, and I have done it, declares Yahweh. So now he's not, now listen, this is not the confusion of like Christianity where, well, we die, we go to heaven, and then somehow we get thrown back in a body so we can be resurrected or whatever other craziness that they teach, because that doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you die and already go somewhere, what's the point of being resurrected when, you know what I'm saying? There's no logic or sense to any of that. So here he's talking about these dry bones that already have life on them, right? Their life was breathed in them. He says, look, that was a picture of something else. Now I'm going to tell you what the picture is of. He says, I am going to open up your graves. I'm going to gather you from all the places I've scattered you. I'm going to bring you into the land that I had promised you, and I will be your Elohim, and you will be my people. But they have to have a recognition that we've been cut off. There's reasons why we've been cut off. We need to fix that. Unlike Christianity that says it was all done away with, so there's nothing to fix. Just believe in Messiah and it's all good. No, if you did something to cause a problem, you need to stop doing it to fix the problem. Or the things you didn't do that needed to be done. Okay, so you have a child that never cleans their room, and so the problem obviously is you're wanting them to clean their room. So let's do away with that, and now you guys are fine. Or is the problem fixed by the person deciding that they're going to start to clean their room? Because you could always stop the fight and the argument by just not needing them to. Because obviously it's you're requiring them to clean the room that's the problem, right? That's just absurdity on something as simple as that. Then we look at what Christianity's done to the Torah. Well, clearly the law was the problem. After all, nobody can keep it. Well, that's not true. Anybody can keep it. The problem is people, not the law. There's nothing hard in the law. And I challenge anybody to show me a law that's hard to do. Really? Is it hard to eat differently? It's hard to keep a different day, observe different holy days? I mean, is these things hard? Is it really hard not to murder, commit adultery, steal, etc.? These are really hard things. Well, maybe for some people they are. But you know what? Most of those things, most governments in the world require you not to do anyway. They're against like everybody's laws. So what is so hard? Well, it's hard because you get picked on and because you don't like people noticing you. But you were called to be a light on a hill. You were called to be noticed. Not that you walk around wanting to be noticed, but you were called to be noticed. So he says to the dry bones, I'm going to put my spirit in you. So remember, like when we did the teaching on the spirit, that what is he talking about here? I'm going to put my intrinsic nature in you. I'm going to cause you to grow and transform so that my nature is your nature. So that you'll walk as I walk. That's what Yeshua did, right? He says, everything I do, the Father told me to do. I've seen him do it. This is what I do. I'm an imitator of him. When you see me, you see the Father because I do everything that he would do. When they see you, they should see Yeshua. They should see the Father. He said, I'm going to put my nature in them. he says, and I shall settle you in your own land, and you shall know that I, Yahweh, have spoken and I have done it. Which was also a problem with Israel, is sometimes they gave credit to the other sources for how things got done. He says, you will know that I did it. Okay, I had a real long discussion with a gentleman that was one time leading a fairly large Messianic organization that doesn't exist anymore, where he really felt like if he could get the organization big enough, he could go to Israel with his organization and all these quote-unquote Ephraimites that he thought he had, and Israel would open arms for them and welcome them with open arms and all this and that. I said, look, I read Ezekiel 37, and everywhere he says, I. Your name is nowhere in Ezekiel 37. And we're to know that he did it. He spoke it, and he did it. Okay? And the word, verse 15, and the word came to me saying, and you, son of man, take a stick for yourself and write on it, for Yehuda and the children of Israel his companions. Then take another stick and write on it for Yosef, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel his companions. So you got two sticks here. This is covered in our two-house teaching and our Discovering Your Identity teaching. There are two sticks. One represents Judah and all of his companions. In other words, those that would have attached themselves to Judah. And one represents Israel and all that would have attached themselves to Israel, which is referred to as Ephraim. That term is often interchangeable because the blessing from Jacob went over through Joseph to Ephraim. Okay? So, then bring them together for yourself into one stick, and they shall become one in your hand. And when the children of your people speak to you, saying, won't you show us what you mean by these? Say to them, thus said the Master Yahweh, see, I am taking the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, I just explained that, right? And the tribes of Israel, his companions, and I shall give them unto him with the stick of Yehuda, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. So they're going to be one again in Yahweh's hand. That's the whole point of the two houses, is that they will become one again. This is not being taught correctly out there, okay? And he says, and the sticks on which you write shall be in your hand before their eyes. And speak to them, thus said the Master Yahweh, see, I am taking the children of Israel from among the Gentiles, wherever they have gone, and shall gather them from all around, and I shall bring them into their land. And I shall make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. And one king shall be king over them all, and let them no longer be two nations, and let them no longer be divided into two reigns. See, up until this point, there are two. So for Judah to run around and say they're one house, they don't understand Scripture. Up until this point, there are two. Now, there's not supposed to be two ultimately. There's supposed to be one. And they will be merged back together here in Ezekiel 37. This has not happened yet. This is a future event. How do we know this? Listen to what it says. So when they are no longer divided into two, verse 23, they shall no longer defile themselves with their idols, nor with their disgusting matters, nor with any of their transgressions. And I shall save them from all their dwelling places in which they have sinned, and I shall cleanse them, and they shall be my people, and I be their Elohim, while David, my servant, is king over them. And they shall all have one shepherd and walk in my right rulings and guard my laws and shall do them. Has this happened yet? No, okay? So we know this is talking about a future event. Now, he says, I shall be their Elohim and they shall be my people. Is that not the words of the covenant? So Ezekiel is talking about the same thing. Jeremiah was talking about the same thing. We read in all kinds of places all throughout Scripture. The phraseology that talks about covenant is, I shall be their Elohim and they shall be my people. That's the Exodus 19 covenant, okay? He says, and they are going to have David, my servant, as king over them. So we're either talking about literally a resurrected David, because David is already dead here, okay? Or we're talking about one who will be standing from the lineage of David in that role of David HaMelech, which is king over all Israel. Because the last king over all Israel was David, then through Solomon, and then the split. And the reason that the part that was preserved, Judah was preserved, was for David's sake. We know this from the way that Yahweh explains it in the splitting. For David's sake, the remnant was left in Judah. in the south. Okay, not for Solomon's sake, he messed it up. And so here we go. So David, my servant, is to reign over them, and they shall all have one shepherd and walk in my right rulings and guard my laws. So in this time in the future, they're going to keep the commandments. They're going to observe the Torah. They're going to be in covenant. They're going to walk in my right rulings. Look, the Deuteronomy 10:12, we started off with that earlier where he says, and now Israel, what does Yahweh want of you? But to fear him. And what's the second part? To walk in all my ways. He says, you're going to fear him and walk in all his ways. So what's it say here? He says, they will have one shepherd and walk in all my ways. They're going to walk in my rulings and guard my laws, and they shall do them. Oh, but now you're talking works. Yes, I am. Because he does. You just wrongly have been taught all the time that works and salvation somehow are linked. Listen to the teaching, Are You Saved? There's a relationship between salvation, faith, and works. It's not faith versus works or grace versus works or salvation versus works. There's a relationship there. You need to learn what that relationship is. Because there's an expectation. Remember it talks about we have no expectancy. Yes, there was an expectancy. Yahweh had an expectation that in the covenant, we would do his right rulings and guard his laws, and we would do them. And he would provide everything else. Verse 25, and they shall dwell in the land that I have given Yaakov my servant, where your fathers dwelt, and they shall dwell in it, they and their children's children forever, and my servant David will be their prince forever. So now either King David's going to live forever at this point, or we're talking about Yeshua now being their king forever. But this has clearly not happened yet. They are not dwelling in the land, their children and their children's children forever with David as their servant, as their king, as their prince forever. And I shall make a covenant of peace with them, an everlasting covenant it is with them. And I shall place them and increase them, and shall place my set-apart place in the midst forever. See, we're tying it now back to covenant. It says, I'm going to renew that covenant. This goes back to Jeremiah 31. And my dwelling place shall be over them, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. That's the same wording as the old covenant. Therefore, it's not a new covenant, meaning different. It's a new covenant, meaning the people broke it and need to make a new one by that. A new one had to be made because the old one was broken. But the terms of it are the same. He describes them right here. And I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Same terms. Because people in the church want you to believe it's a different covenant of some sort. Absolutely not. We're actually going to finish this today. Amazing. And the Gentiles shall know that I, Yahweh, am setting Israel apart when my set-apart place is in the midst forever. So the set-apart place in the midst forever, isn't that the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven? Revelation 21, and it will be in their midst. And so hopefully we're starting to really get this covenant thing and its redemptive part as well. Its connection to salvation and deliverance and redemption and being restored back into this covenant that they broke. So hopefully we have that in mind, because next time in part 40, we're going to enter into the Brit, into the renewed covenant verses or the apostolic verses starting in Matthew. Wow, we got it all done. I did have a place to go in Hosea, but we don't need to, so we'll skip that. All right, that was something I kind of noted for myself. All right, so let's kind of wrap this together by going before the Father. Father, we come before you as we finish this journey through the Tanakh and trying to understand covenant. And now we should be prepared and properly set with the right framework to see what you say through the apostolic writings. That, Father, that we would understand that the covenant has always been what it's always been, which is a relationship where you, with your people, have a relationship where you are their Elohim, and they are your people. The expectancy is that your people would obey and walk in all your ways and guard your commands, and you would provide all of their needs. That they would have no fear of anything or any lack, but that all would be provided in response to their doing the doing. And so, Father, thank you for showing this to us. Thank you so much for showing us how there's wisdom, knowledge, and understanding related to all this. Thank you for showing us what covenant actually means so that we are now prepared with the right foundation to read the verses in the Brit in the renewed covenant, well, as they would call it, in the writings from Matthew through Revelation, so we could truly understand what you're talking about and what you're referring to in those places. So, Father, we thank you. We appreciate so much and ask that you would inspire us to trust, to live in reality, and to embrace the covenant that you've set before us so that we can truly be your people and you would truly be our Elohim. So, Father, we come before you now in authority and in love and appreciation in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen. Amen. Amen.